Allow me to introduce to you the Cuban Missile Crisis. Fidel Castro started a revolution in 1953 in Cuba, which eventually ended in 1959 with Fidel and his revolutionaries successfully overthrowing the Cuban government and replacing it with a communist government. It was the Cold War, the USA's fight against communism and the USSR's fight against democracy. Cuba, now being a communist government, started to discuss with the USSR on some alliances. Cuba being an island south of the USA, only about 103 miles away, were the USA, and so the USA began plans to topple over Fidel and his government. John F. Kennedy, President of the United States of America, started plans to invade Cuba in an invasion called the Bay of Pigs. This attack was a devastating loss for the USA and worried Cuba that the USA may try again. So in response, Fidel asked Nukita Khrushchev, leader of USSR, about setting up some of the USSR's nuclear missiles in Cuba, so they have better range towards the USA. The USSR agreed, and with the missiles sent over, this was the beginning of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which happened on October 1962. An American U-2 spy plane flew over Cuba and took some photos of the missiles being built. The old Stars and Stripes discovered that the USSR was planning missiles in Cuba, and so the USA created what they called a quarantine around Cuba, preventing any ships with missiles entering, but allowing civilian ships and vessels containing trade items like food to pass. The USSR was outraged, but the USA said they will only remove the quarantine if the USSR removed the missiles from Cuba. The USSR refused the request, and so the USA saw that taking over the island was most likely their only option. A couple days before the planned invasion, a USSR submarine was signaled by a depth charge to come up from hiding. The crew in the submarine thought the war had started and set up to launch the nuclear missile they had in the ship. To launch this missile, all three higher-ups on the ship had to agree. The missile was loaded, and as the crew was waiting, two of the higher-ups agreed to the launch, except Vasili Arkhipov, who refused. They argued for a while, but eventually decided to, like a bar of soap, slip out of there. This heroic move most likely saved the day. Had the missile launched, the war would have definitely started. The invasion of Cuba was getting near. There was no other choice but to invade, until Khrushchev finally sent an agreement to Kennedy. The terms were that the USA would not invade Cuba and would remove their missile from Turkey and Italy, which were placed there to fire at the USSR. The USSR would then have to remove the missiles from Cuba. Another side agreement was that no one would mention the removal of the missiles from Turkey and Italy in the news. Now both countries could breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that they wouldn't be nuked at the press of a button. After the Cuban Missile Crisis, better communications lines were created between the USSR instead of using letters. Nikita Khrushchev, leader of the USSR, was replaced after the crisis. Also, the theory called MAD, mutually assured destruction, was also born, which essentially assures that if one country gets nuked, the other will too. So as to not get nuked, no one will use them. Why did I choose this? I chose this story because I find history interesting, and was reading a book on the Cuban Missile Crisis. This event is pretty important, because it created the path for the end of the Cold War, and the realization of the possible damage of nukes. There are many lessons from the Cuban Missile Crisis. One of them, politics is fragile and can easily create catastrophic events. Had the USA and the USSR not made a deal, war would have definitely started. Talking it out and making an agreement is always the better option. The USA tried to talk and make an agreement with the USSR first, and this is what created peace. Another lesson. We should know something well and its consequences before acting. Had the Soviet submarine launched its missile, it could have begun the war, and both the USSR and the USA would have been bombed. We shouldn't play with something we don't fully understand. Third lesson, that we should strengthen communications between each other, because a lot of the crisis was sparked by miscommunications. The Soviet submarine was not able to contact home to figure out if war had started. Also, if any communication errors between the USA and the Soviet Union or their respective armies had happened, a domino effect would have begun.